my head exploded. It didn't make sense to watch him be such a professional at the head of this massive motor company with this big partnership next to Horner. And then you're like 2 degrees away from wanting him to be like, in a van
down by the river. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, 2026 is shaping up to be pretty wild. I mean, Drive to Survive did such a good job at getting the world and especially America super interested in Formula One.
Yep.
And then now we got a possible Cadillac Andretti entry, so we might have an 11th team.
Yep.
We have, for sure, Ford is going in with Red Bull,
Yep.
which, by the way, I don't know if y'all knew this. If you watched the announcement of Red Bull and Ford, Ford's CEO is Jim Farley. That's his name, Jim Farley.
Yes.
Jim Farley is the uncle of Chris Farley, John Farley, and the other Farleys that y'all don't know. And Margie Farley as well as the oldest daughter. It doesn't matter. Tommy Farley, and Kevin Farley, of course.
Yeah.
And so if you watch that video now, knowing that he's a Farley.
Yeah.
Hard Farley vibes coming out of that man.
Wild. I didn't know that. I didn't realize. I mean, watching him with the name and then like the mannerisms, I was like, wait, what? And then I hit you up and you're like, oh, yes. You're like, one, I just had dinner with the Farley family because you were on the road with David Spade.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is happening? I was like spinning. My head, it just didn't make sense. I was like, wait, he's the CEO? And then I was talking to a friend of the podcast, Kevin Owens, and we were talking about the Ford stuff, and he just knows so much detail. And then he was like, oh, by the way, have we talked about the Farley thing and how weird that is? And I was like, dude, we were supposed to talk about it last podcast, but we'll talk about it this podcast.
Yeah.
And I just was like, my head exploded. It didn't make sense to watch him be such a professional at the head of this massive motor company with this big partnership next to Horner. And then you're like 2 degrees away from wanting him to be like, in a van
down by the river.
It was so close.
In a Ford Transit down by the river.
Yeah, just always moving product. And so it was just a weird trip. And I'm sure a lot of people already knew that, but it was...
I don't know if they did.
It blew my mind.
Yeah, because, I mean, everyone I've told doesn't seem to know that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because apparently... Jim Farley is he maybe not the nicest of guys. I think he always had he was on the track to be this big deal in the Farley family, and apparently he would always call Papa Farley and be like your son's making an ass out of himself on TV again. Tell him to knock that shit off. Like he would tell him that stuff. John Farley was telling me a story about how he went up to Jim Farley. He's like, Uncle Jim. And Jim was talking to someone, and he comes up to Uncle Jim, and Jim Farley goes, just a second, John. And he finishes this conversation, and he goes, you just interrupted a $500 million deal with Carroll Shelby. What do you need?
What's up, man?
It's just, yeah, dude. So,
crazy.
So I'm going to try to get him on the pod. I don't know if it'll happen or not, because from the interactions that John told me about Uncle Jimmy, he seems like he might not be into it, but at the same time, I'll be like, look, I never really liked Chris that much either. So it's
throw him under the bus immediately. Like, yeah. Same team. Oh,
same team.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.